costs are rippling. They first started at, call it at the Main Street level, and now they're hitting the corporate level, and people are making decisions now, cutting back on things that they would normally do. It's going to be a really, and don't forget all this banking stuff is going to be hitting in the next 18 months. It's going to be a really rough 24 months, I believe.
Ken McElroy, how much of a disaster is office space right now?
It's horrible, dude. Like horrible. Like I tell you, I got friends that are going down, 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 and it's not sustainable either, Chris. The work from home, the people don't want to go back to work like they used to. The employers don't need as much space as they wanted before. And so the reason it hasn't completely crashed is because most of these leases are 3, 5, 7, even longer years. And so, the pandemic wasn't really that long ago, and the behavior of going to the office has completely changed. And the interesting thing is the lag effect is actually going to surprise you. Most
Hmm.
of these big high rises that you look at with all the names up top, you typically banks, let's say, they're owned by institutions. They're owned by Wall Street. So if you look at a capital stack, you usually have debt, then you have equity. Even the equity might be a pension, might be a retirement plan, might be,
Mm-hmm.
BlackRock, Goldman. It doesn't really matter. Managed money. Very rarely is it, let's say guys like you and I just dumping 100 grand here, 100 grand here. So, that's going to make its way into people's quarterly statements that they rarely open and rarely talk to their financial planners about. So that's next.
So these office buildings, though, is there anything we can do with them? Can we turn them into apartments or something? Or what's the issue here?
Trust me, I wish. I've looked. There's a study that just came out, and it says that less than 4% of all the office buildings are even convertible to residential. So I looked at one last 2 weeks ago. It was 120,000 square feet, 100% vacant, right in my backyard here in Phoenix. So 4 levels high, beautiful project, maybe 25 years old, 100% vacant. So obviously owned by the bank. Okay. So I'm looking at this thing and, think about it. Like, how much space do you want if you're going to, live somewhere? Well, you're going to want at least 1,000 feet. Um, well, that means that I could only get about 100 units in there if it even works, and
Mm-hmm.
who wants to live, next door to another office building? So you
Yeah.
have all these things. It's essentially, at the end of the day, it's worth the dirt. Actually, it's worse because the dirt, you've got the cost of the dirt, and then you have the cost of the demolition,
Mm.
and then you have to go through all the processes to get it rebuilt again. So now, residential is not the only way to convert these things. I've had people convert them into self storage. You could be super creative with these office buildings, but it's going to be a problem, and it's making it's it the defaults are making their way through the system right now.
Well, so help me walk me through this because I don't know this space at all. So what would happen to say, I don't know, Toledo has a bunch of office buildings that go vacant and people walk from them. Then what happens to who who does something with them? Whose responsibility is
Yeah.
that?
So the process is essentially they'll make them all the way back to the debt. So in any real estate transaction, there's what you call a capital stack. So the first part of the capital stack is actually mortgage or debt. Same thing in a house. The second piece is typically the equity, and it's usually priced a little bit higher. Now, that equity, especially in these big office buildings, is traditionally a pension 401k, let's say, or something like that. So the first thing to be gone is that the equity piece. And so let's say the California Retired Teachers Pension, CalPERS or something. Let's say that they're the equity piece. That's
Mm-hmm.
gone. Now then it goes back to the bank, whatever bank lent on it, okay? Because what's happening right now is that the value of the real estate is less than the actual debt. So at that point, the person who owns the partnership that owns that building, they're not going to write a check they're just going to turn the keys back over to the bank. Then the bank's going to take that asset back. And let's say that, like on the one I was talking about earlier, let's say that that debt was $20 million. Well, and the property, by the way, on that exact instance, was for sale for 7. So at one time, this asset was worth about 35. So at one time, there's 15 million of equity, 20 million of debt, and today it's worth 7. So the math is simple. The first 15's gone. That's typically in the form of equity. The next 20 is in the form of debt, if and only if it sells for 7, let's say. Then the bank has to write that other 13 down if they could sell it for 7, and so the bank takes a hit as well. So that's essentially how. And then of course it's sitting there vacant, and that's only if somebody buys it. If somebody buys it for 7, then they have another use for it. Obviously, then now it's being recycled. But what I've seen so far is that nobody can figure out what to do with these things. So, these could be ghost cities, right? At some point, you just never know. I mean, you could, I know this is happening all over the place. I mean, you could shoot a rifle in some of these towns and not hit anybody.
Wow. So, but it does sound ghosty, and we have all these regulations, which you know better than I. I've got just a small project running, and the regulations are astonishing, right? And so, if you do want to convert something, I saw a big deal where a big building went off to the other partners for $1, and I was talking with a real estate guy, and he said they got ripped off, not the people who sold it, the people who bought it, because it's like it had a negative equity on that, like because they were going to have to spend so much money to now deal with that asset. It was actually an underwater asset.
I was in Tulsa. I went. I was actually there on a. I went to the NCAA wrestling championships, and it was in Tulsa, and I met with a guy that owned a big high-rise building, and I was walking. Actually, it's in that movie, The Tulsa King, we were walking along, and he's like, "Guess how much I paid for this?" I go, "How much?" He goes, $1. I go, "No." He goes, "But it was." He goes, "I had to put so much more money into this thing afterwards, so it's $1 plus." And so you got to think of both sides of the transaction. So somebody built it. Somebody built it with debt. Somebody built it with equity. It's a beautiful, beautiful old building with the beautiful marble lobbies and just absolutely gorgeous. And he did a great job of converting this thing into residential, restaurant, rooftop bar, all that kind of stuff. It was definitely the place to go in Tulsa. And he walked me through all the waterfall and the how it all worked. But he got it for $1.
Wow. So, well, walk me through this, and because I just read the articles, and I know you know a lot more about this than I do. That's why we're talking. There's a huge amount of this out there. I've heard like numbers that begin with T, like trillion.
Yeah.
There's a lot out there. Who's eating the losses here?
So the first people to eat the losses will be whoever the equity piece is, right?
But
And that could
who
be
is that?
things. So it could be a pension fund, for example. I mean, when these office buildings, a big high-rise office building never gets to Main Street. Like these assets are traded at the Wall Street level, so they're packaged by whoever. Like it doesn't really matter. There could be insurance companies, they could be pensions. Just manage money. Everybody's, call it Main Street's money, really. And sometimes you don't even know that you're involved. You know how these things are all bundled up and rebranded somehow, and you don't even know really, what's in there. But that's the first piece to go. The second piece to go is going to be the small and regional banks. And oddly enough, Chris, the big banks, I mean, the big names, all the big ones that we know, they're not as exposed as you would think. They've been pretty smart around this. It's the small, local, and mid-sized and regional banks that are the ones that are actually the most exposed. If you look at, all you got to do is look at debt maturities. The cool part about commercial real estate is if I buy something, it's recorded and everybody knows there's a marker. It says this is how long the loan is and this is when it matures, period. So, you can track these things. And, like San Francisco is, one of the most notable things is I'll just make fun of them. And Elon Musk took over Twitter. Let's say, and by the way, this is Salesforce. This is, there's a whole bunch of companies that did this. So I don't just want to pick on him. But Twitter had all kinds of office buildings, let's just say in San Francisco, right? And so we all know publicly what he did with the employees. He went from, a lot of employees to significantly less. So that means he needs less space. So he had buildings, obviously, that he's like, well, I don't need the buildings now. And then he would go to the imagine you being the owner of a building that Twitter's in, and you're like, this is the greatest thing ever. Next thing you know, there's nobody there, and he's consolidating. You're screwed. You know what I mean? If Musk says, I'm not paying you, you're now negotiating, and you're going to get caught in that, that long process. So that owner, that whoever it is, had debt and had equity. It could have even been a family office. These things are whatever they are, and so it's, let's just put it this way: any building that could be a residential home is worth less vacant. So a high-rise office building vacant is worth very, very, very little, if anything. And the same thing with multifamily, same with retail. Like we all see it, like when there's these big retailers, like Express just filed for bankruptcy, Bed Bath & Beyond filed for bankruptcy, Macy's, Penny's, Sears. Now, of course, we're in the retail space now. When they move out of buildings, that mall starts to die. And that's why, you're starting to see it in the regional malls. The regional malls are dying because the Amazon effect. So that's just one more example. But it's the same concept with office, exact same. It's just people aren't going to the office. They don't need 2 floors. Even lawyers, as you know, they're working from home more, right? They don't need, like, the customer does not care to go downtown and go up to a lawyer's office and sit there when they can do a Zoom and, and read a document together. And they can do it from from their house or a boat or wherever they want. So things have changed a lot, and the old school office buildings are taking it in the chin right now.
And that's probably not going to change anytime soon because of, the workplace behavior changes. But beyond that, even if the Fed dropped interest rates, because I assume that this is an interest rate story too, right? There was a cap rate, we had low rates, things made sense. All of a sudden they don't make sense at a higher interest rate. They don't pencil out anymore. And so even if the Fed drops rates, it's still not going to fix this problem.
In most cases, yeah, it's a good point. So if you have a building that's 50% vacant, it doesn't matter. Like if you have something that's 80, 90% vacant and your rate was 4 and rates are now 7 and your loan matures, a lower interest rate can definitely help you keep a building because you don't want to walk, right? The last thing you want to do is walk. But so it's all individual circumstance, and it depends on what their loan is when it matures. So the whole issue is about maturing loan, and the value of any property anywhere is based on the cash flow from it. So if something is 90%, 100% occupied, that means it should be cash flowing, right? And then there's a return out to the partnerships and whatever that might be. And so when if you just look at a 10-story building, let's say, and if 5 of the floors are vacant, you don't have the income coming in. And you've got your debt, you've got your expenses, you've got property tax, you got insurance, you got utilities, you got the labor, you got all the stuff, all the maintenance costs, and all those kinds of things are all sitting in there above the debt. So typically any kind of real estate is going to have a break even in the 60s or 70% occupancy or collected. You're going to have that. Doesn't matter if it's retail, office, or multifamily or whatever it is. There is a number. It's just as simple as just adding up all your expenses, including your debt.
Yeah. Now, Ken, I get this question a lot because I got people who are very interested in well, maybe moving somewhere, or they have a question, right? They're in a house, but maybe they want to be in a different house, or some people want to move out to the country now for reasons. Uh, Whatever those things are, what's your read on where we are on the residential side of this story?
It's a super complicated question, but I'll tell you, so you got to be careful and not look at the national figures.
Mm-hmm.
So the national figures, obviously, they have to roll up, and so what you're going to see in the press or anything is going to be national. So the way to look at a residential market is by what's actually happening in that submarket. So wherever you are. So it's interesting because there are lots of little housing markets that are really really tight, and
Mm-hmm.
there's no inventory, and then there are others where there's just way too much. And so when you add them up, of course, and you start to average them, you don't
Yeah.
actually see where things are. But the way to look at that question, if I was that individual, is real estate does not do well without people. So, right? So
Yeah.
they don't, if nobody's renting there or nobody's living there, there's no jobs there, there's no, whatever. That is the key factor. So you got to take a look at the migration patterns of people, and that changed dramatically from the pandemic. So as people start to defund police, as people start to see crime, as people start to see property taxes increase, as people start to see employers go remote, that what that does is that makes people make different kinds of decisions. Obviously the family keeps largely a lot of folks together, and so that's one thing that can keep people somewhere and definitely help a housing market. But so you have to look at that. So take a look at the net population growth of the top states. So those have been Texas,
Mm-hmm.
Florida, and they'll say the Carolinas, Tennessee's up there, Arizona's up there. Those have been the ones that have been the positive nets. And we're talking about a fair amount of people, 100, 200,000 a year positive plus. What that does is, let's say a bunch of people, let's just pick on Texas. When there's that many people moving to Texas, there's people moving to Austin, let's say Houston, Dallas, and for all kinds of reasons, it puts pressure on everything. It puts pressure on rents. It puts pressure on housing prices. It puts pressure on getting a reservation at a restaurant or whatever it is, And so even the school system. So so there are areas, oddly enough, that are actually doing quite well, and there are areas that are contracting. So you just got to take a look at that, and then that'll tell you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know it's tricky, because but there's this vibe going on out there where I know a lot more people. You and I go way back, and I've been to your place up in Sedona Canyon, and we rode Tom cars out in the desert that
Yeah,
one
we
time.
did.
That was a lot of fun, a lot of fun, more fun than I thought it was going to be. And so the issue that I've seen out there is that there's more and more people sort of getting this vibe of saying, I don't really want to be in these cities anymore, right? And if you can exfil from New York City and get to Tennessee, that's fine. I understand that. But there are people now who are realizing that there are really inhospitable political climates that have just erupted very rapidly, mostly post-COVID. And you find out that you live in a state that supports medical tyranny or doesn't care about property rights or has a really activist judicial system. I think the things that happened to Trump in the New York legal system are questionable at best, but are a big warning shot across the bow at worst to anybody who's thinking about investing there. How do you interpret those things, the politics of this? I know that wasn't part of your calculus a while ago as much as it may be
No,
today.
gosh, I said, this is what I said. I said I never thought I would be so concerned about who my governor was. Like
Yeah.
I've always voted, but I was like, man, it's like really becoming a thing. Like obviously, and so I just, number one, I just hope people do that because you do have a voice and you can make a difference. But you're right. I was skiing with a good friend of mine who's the head of capital markets for a huge company, and I won't say who, one of the biggest real estate company, let's just say. And we were skiing, and I said to him, I said, hey, where's all your money going? Right? Simple question. He's like, not the coasts. I go, really? He's like,
Oh.
nope. He goes, if you think about it, that's where all the political unrest is. Now, I'm generalizing, right? Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
they've got investments all over, but, um, you know, money flows where it's treated best. I can't emphasize that enough. And that, by the way, that might be from this big company, or it might just be from people that are trying to retire. They're
Mm-hmm.
going to go where they and their money are treated best. And that could be from a safety standpoint, it could be from a political environment, it could be, all kinds of reasons. People make lots of decisions based on those things. And I think that these
Mm-hmm.
politicians better wake up, because people are taking notice now, and they're saying, I want to raise my kids here, I want to live here. That is definitely happening. And as we know, there's businesses being moved. People, I just heard of a big one yesterday that moved out of California, and they're picking wherever. They're just going. They're saying, I'm gonna relocate, whatever it is, personally, my company, this, that, and they're taking notice, and they don't like the way that their tax dollars are being treated, and they don't
Mm-hmm.
like the way that what their future is not as bright as it potentially was.
Yeah, I want to talk about those tax dollars in just a second. I can't wait to get your opinion on this and views on it. But first, I'm really looking forward to seeing you in Limitless again. It's in Dallas this year in August. Can you tell people about that? Because it's one of my favorite conferences to go to. It is just such a good production, and there's so many quality people there.
Thank you. Yeah, this is our third year. We've sold out the last 2 years, and it's at limitlessexpo.com. And this year it's the 29th, 30th, and 31st in Dallas, Texas at the Gaylord. We have about 45 speakers, and there's no selling from stage. It's not a real estate conference. It's a conference to educate. That's it. Like, I'm confused, Chris. I am all in with real estate. Okay. When I have an energy question, I go to you. When I have let's say, a gold question, I'll go to somebody like Mike Maloney. I've done that intentionally. Those are strategic relationships that I have because I don't know. And so what
Mm-hmm.
we're trying to do is we're trying to bring all of those together. So, because my investors, we have a lot of investors, we have thousands. They have the same questions. They're like, what are you doing? I'm like, hey man, like, here's what I'm doing, but I'm not saying you should do that. And so my thought is, why not just bring everyone in one room and have a few day conference, so that we can have different disciplines, and people can walk away with their own opinion on what they could do with real facts. And so, it's been well received. It's been awesome, and we strive to have no sales from stage, and just pure education. So it's not a pitch fest. I hate those.
Yeah, well, I'll be there, and I'm really looking forward to it. I met so many great people there last year. Some followers of mine, but also a lot of other folks. It was fab, and I got to interact with some really good people. Because I agree, this is where you need the collective intelligence. We're smarter together, right? But only if we're all listening and we have an open frame of mind. So that's what I love, is how you set it up, and that's what it's about, and you set the tone, and people are there to learn, not just to dump what they know and all that. It was very collegial. I like that.
Yeah,
It's good.
yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. We're trying to. At this point, we don't need more stuff to do. Guys like you and me. But I
Yeah.
felt like this was important because my
Mm.
investors are as confused as I am. I watch everything, I read everything, I try, but a lot of this stuff is confusing.
It is, and that creates a business opportunity for guys like me, because for whatever reason, I love trying to make sense of stuff, and I'll
I
grab my
know you
little
do.
piece of
That's
that
why I
tiger.
love. It's the greatest.
Just fun.
That's why I love
It's
chatting
fun.
with you. I'm so grateful that you're coming to Limitless again. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Maybe I'll talk about the taxes. So I know every year this really confused me. So I want to get back to taxes because Biden doesn't do anything. Biden, we're sure, doesn't even dress himself at this stage. But I mean, whoever's handling him thought it would be a good idea, Ken, in an election year. And the headlines were proposing a more than doubling of the capital gains tax rate
Yeah,
to
saw that.
44.6%, right? But if you read through all the other things, the one I wanted to get your point of view on was they were talking about either eliminating or reducing the cap on 1031s to $500,000. What barely I know about that from knowing some people in the real estate space, I'm like, I couldn't imagine a bigger sort of a spanner thrown into the wrench, into the works. First, I know it probably won't pass and people are telling that to themselves, but take it at face value. Why are they proposing that and what would the impact be if they got their way?
So it would be huge. First of all, this comes up all the time, right? Is they want to, what they want is they want to tax something that's sold, period. That's it. So that would be the why. And what a 1031 allows you to do is it allows you to sell something, put it into a 1031 exchange account, and then roll it into something new. So this is exactly what I did with my property in Sedona, ironically, is I sold an apartment building. I put it into a 1031 exchange account, which means I cannot touch it. And then it rolls right into something new. So you're basically just rolling forward. And so that is what a 1031 exchange, and there's parameters and timeframes around all of it. So, but if you take a nickel out, you get taxed on it. So they want their tax. That's actually it's low hanging fruit for tax. It comes up all the time. The other side of the 1031, yeah. So what would happen on the other side of the 1031 if they reduce it to 500, let's say? Then what would happen was I would have never done that transaction, and I probably wouldn't have sold the asset that I'm in. So it's almost like a situation we have now where it's trapped equity. That trapped equity will actually stay in that asset for a long period of time, and there won't be movement back and forth because that's essentially what it's for. And so the 1031 is a heck of a tool for people that are in the real estate space, obviously, especially for legacy and wealth transfer, for families and stuff like that. So it'll have a massive impact if it passes, and it will rattle the real estate industry significantly because a big chunk of transactions. And don't forget, a lot of people look at, the owner doesn't get the 1031. Think of everyone that's involved,
Yeah.
from contractors to title companies to commercial lenders to, these brokers and on the real estate side and on the mortgage side. And there are the lawyers and there's so many folks involved in a real estate transaction. All of it would stop.
Wow. Yeah, I've seen some analysis that says it would just cost tons of jobs and all that. But this is a big thing, though, because we see that this administration is really, they like the taxes, and it just struck me as odd in an election year to say, oh, we're going to be the taxation party. But what was really interesting, Ken, was and I got this from talking with you and Robert Kiyosaki and other people, that this idea that the government taxation is as funny as it looks. It's actually designed to do some things, right? It's incentives. So turns out the government wants oil wells, it wants jobs, it wants apartments and houses for people to live in. So there are benefits over there, and the incentives, you get more of that. They were talking about chopping all three of those in their proposal. Whether they get it or not is a different story. But I thought it was interesting in an election year, them saying these big constituencies, oil and gas, real estate, in capital formation, we're gonna line them all up against the wall and tell them they are no longer wanted or needed in this story. I thought that was I couldn't interpret that. It was a very bizarre moment for me. What do you make of that?
To that. You remember that debate with Trump and Hillary when they're on the stage and she's like,
that's because I'm smart.
Taxes and all that stuff. And he goes, that's because I'm smart. Well,
yeah, I love
what
that.
most people don't realize is the reason that she didn't press him was because everyone that funds her campaign benefits from a lot of those tax benefits, and that's what he was saying. The reason he doesn't pay tax is because he doesn't pay tax legally. Now, a lot of people might question me on that, but the end of the day, I know what straight line depreciation is. I know what bonus depreciation is. I know what a 1031 is. These are all things that are sitting right inside of the tax code. And there's the same kinds of things. You get a massive write-off for oil and gas. You get a massive write-off for green energy. You get a massive write-off for solar. You get a massive write-off for wind. And so these people are using the tax law. The tax book is actually quite large, and it basically has most of it are the things that you cannot do. But there's a piece in there that basically says these are the things the government wants. And if you want to see what the government wants, they give you tax breaks. And that's all. They need money from Main Street, and so they created a tax loophole for somebody that offsets income from somewhere else. That's how the system is. That's how it's been forever. And so as we start to take away those things, what will happen? It will, it will significantly, obviously, it'll significantly affect where that money goes and to who.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what they end up coming up with it, but I'm already in one of the most heavily taxed brackets. No complaints, right? It's a good problem to have, but it's so much more than other locations. And I know people who've done the Act 22 down in Puerto Rico, and people say, oh well, at least you're not paying 50% in Finland. I'm like, yeah, but it's the same 50% I'm paying, and you get free healthcare and free college for your kids and whatever. So I think this is a conversation that needs to boil up this year, which is, what are we getting for our money? And we watch DC just absolutely throwing our money like into a furnace, literally in the case of our overseas misadventures, right? And I think people are starting to say, hey, wait a minute, what are we getting for this? And we should be asking those questions.
One of the businesses I have is a property management company, and we have 300 people in that business, and so I'll buy an asset, typically apartments. And it's my job to maintain it. New roofs, I need to paint it, the infrastructure, the parking lot, because if I don't, people stop going and they're like, why would I live here, right? So if you look at the way this country's being run, I'm talking about bridges, I'm talking about highways, I'm talking about infrastructure, I'm talking about so many things. We deserve an F. And talk about our school system. I mean, you and I can go down all these roads. That's a fact. And, it's gotten away from us. And I can never run anything personally from a business standpoint that way. I would be fired, and I deserve to be fired. The problem is we're all just sitting here watching it, just shaking our heads.
Yeah. Yeah. It's astonishing. You can go to an internet cafe in the Philippines where there's literally water up to your ankles and get 10x download speeds that you get in the average US location, right? Like high-speed internet is like everywhere in the world. It's not here yet because we have different priorities, right? So yeah, I think it's time for people to get involved in that story.
Yes, without a doubt. And then so many other things. I mean, obviously, the pandemic, flushed out a whole bunch of things on the medical system. Obviously, we've got problems with the school system. We got problems with the financial system. Man, it's those are the three amigos right there.
Yeah, sure is. You're talking my language now. So, hey, Ken, I guess kind of finalish question here. So, as you put your finger up to the wind of the economy, how are you reading it right now?
I think we're heading towards stagflation. We've got low GDP and we've got inflation. I don't think that the Fed has any control over it. It's sticky for sure. And I mean, we see energy is going to go up, housing is going to go up, food production is going to go up. It's interesting. I actually went down a couple deep dives around stagflation, and the third thing, of course, is high unemployment. Well, the Fed wants higher unemployment because low unemployment is inflationary, ironically. So, but the first two create high unemployment. So those two are here, And I don't know. I see people pulling back, Chris. I see businesses pulling back. And costs are rippling. They first started at call it at the Main Street level, and now they're hitting the corporate level, and people are making decisions now, and cutting back on things that they wouldn't normally do. And it's going to be a really, and don't forget all this banking stuff is going to be hitting in the next 18 months. It's going to be a really rough 24 months, I believe.
Well, I sadly agree with you, and this is just dry wood has been stored up for a little too long in this story. And the Fed is never a good time to allow a recession, and they think they can stage manage the whole thing. I don't believe in that. I think when we get smart again, they shouldn't control the price of money, and they shouldn't try and control what's happening in the larger economy by juicing it. That just things need to come and go. Breathe in, breathe out.
Free market. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
it's just it's not free, right?
never is. Never is. I'm getting all fundamental these days, like, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness kind of stuff. I'm getting back to the core stuff in life, because it's honestly, we've gotten away from that. So that's an interesting.
I know. Well, you of all people have made one of the greatest steps by going up and buying that amazing farm of yours. And, that is a good first step.
Absolutely. And I think more people are gonna get there, younger people in particular too. So I'm pretty excited to see who's waking up in this story, and we'll get back to it. We might have a rough road between here and there, but I'm pretty positive long term. Near
Yeah.
term, you know, local mileage will vary in this story.
The great thing is that as individuals, there's a lot we can do. And if, the one thing to not do is to watch the media. You got to find
Yes.
people and go make some of your own decisions.
Agreed. Agreed. So with that, Ken, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing you in a few months at Limitless. So
Yeah.
keep being you, buddy. I just love talking to you.
You too, bud, and make sure give a big hug to Evie for me.
Will do. Will do. With that, thanks everyone. We'll be back next time. And Ken, have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too, Chris. Cheers, man.